On the surface, they look like everyday Filipinas living simple, low-key lives, riding regular cars, wearing plain outfits, keeping things quiet. But behind that modest appearance is a level of wealth most people would never guess. We're talking private estates, global businesses, luxury assets, and fortunes so massive they could reshape entire industries. In this video, we uncover the extremely rich Filipinas who deliberately choose to live like they're broke and the surprising reasons why they keep it that way. Chapter 10. Socorro Ramos. We begin with a woman who started with nothing. No empire, no privilege, no safety net, just determination and a small dream that would eventually turn into one of the biggest retail success stories in the Philippines. Socorro Ramos is the woman behind National Bookstore, a brand that became a household name across the country. But here's where it gets interesting. Even after building a massive retail empire, she never carried herself like someone sitting on top of extreme wealth. No loud luxury lifestyle. No excessive public display of riches. In fact, her image has always been surprisingly simple and grounded, especially considering the scale of what she built from scratch. The National Bookstore isn't just a shop, it's a nationwide institution. From school supplies to books to retail chains across major cities, it became part of everyday life for millions of Filipinos. And yet, the woman behind it maintained a lifestyle that didn't scream billionaire energy. That contrast is exactly what makes her place on this list so powerful. Because while many people assume extreme wealth comes with constant flaunting, Socorro Ramos represents something different. Old-school wealth built on work, discipline, and long-term vision rather than attention or image. Even at the height of her success, she was known more for her business mindset than for luxury living. No viral billionaire lifestyle moments, no obsession with public validation. Just a consistent presence in a business she helped shape for decades. And that's the quiet shock factor. Someone who helped build a nationwide empire, yet never needed the world to see her as rich to prove it. But as we move up this countdown, the next names shift from retail success stories into even more powerful circles, where billion-dollar influence moves even more silently behind the scenes. Chapter 9. Bea Alonzo. To millions of Filipinos, she's simply one of the most recognizable actresses in the country. Elegant, talented, successful, but still somehow relatable. And that's exactly why Bea Alonzo earns a spot on this list. Because behind that calm and grounded public image is a level of wealth most people seriously underestimate. Over the years, Bea transformed herself from a television superstar into a full-blown business-minded celebrity with major investments, premium properties, endorsement deals, and multiple income streams outside acting. She didn't just rely on fame, she used it strategically. From blockbuster films to high-paying brand partnerships, she quietly built a fortune that places her among the wealthiest actresses in the Philippines. But here's the strange part. Unlike many celebrities who constantly showcase designer collections, luxury vacations, and extravagant lifestyles online, Bea often presents herself in a much simpler and more relaxed way. Whether she's sharing peaceful moments on her farm, wearing casual outfits, or posting ordinary day-to-day activities, her image feels surprisingly normal compared to the amount of money she actually has. And that contrast is what makes people curious. Because if someone didn't know who she was, they might never guess she owns high-value real estate, luxury assets, and businesses connected to years of elite-level success in Philippine entertainment. Even her public personality feels different from the typical ultra-rich celebrity image. She appears more reserved than flashy, more focused on comfort and privacy than constant luxury attention. And in today's social media era where many celebrities compete to display wealth online, that kind of low-key presence stands out even more. But don't let the simplicity fool you. Behind the calm image is a woman who spent years building serious financial power through smart career choices and strategic investments. She may not constantly look rich in public, but financially, Bea Alonzo is operating on a completely different level from the average person. And moving further up this countdown, the next names become even more powerful because some of these women control fortunes tied directly to billion-dollar corporations and old money influence. Chapter 8. Maricris Zobel. When people talk about extreme wealth in the Philippines, one family name almost always enters the conversation sooner or later: the Zobel de Ayala family, a dynasty connected to banking, real estate, telecommunications, infrastructure, and some of the most powerful corporations in the country. And right within that circle of influence is Maricris Zobel, a woman whose lifestyle feels surprisingly understated compared to the enormous wealth surrounding her. And honestly, that's what makes her inclusion on this list so interesting. Because unlike modern celebrities or social media personalities who constantly showcase luxury to stay relevant, Maricris Zobel belongs to a completely different category of wealth: old money. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to scream for attention because its influence is already deeply rooted into the country's economic structure. That difference changes everything. You rarely see flashy headlines surrounding her personal lifestyle. No endless social media flexing. No dramatic displays of extravagance. In fact, many people outside elite circles may not even recognize her name immediately, despite the level of financial power connected to her family background. And yet, behind that quiet public image is access to one of the most influential business networks in the Philippines. The Ayala-linked empire has shaped major parts of Filipino daily life for decades, from business districts and real estate developments to banking systems and telecommunications. That means the scale of wealth involved here goes far beyond ordinary millionaire status. We're talking about generational influence tied to billion-dollar institutions. But what makes Maricris Zobel stand out is how controlled and low-key her image remains despite all of it. There's no obvious attempt to look richer than everyone else. No loud branding of wealth. Instead, her public presence feels polished, discreet, and almost intentionally simple compared to what many people expect from someone connected to that level of privilege. And that quietness is exactly what makes the wealth feel even bigger. Because sometimes, the richest people in the room are the ones who never feel the need to prove it at all. Chapter 7. Regina Paz Lopez. Most wealthy people spend their lives protecting luxury. But Regina Paz Lopez spent much of hers fighting for causes that often had nothing to do with personal comfort, status, or elite image. And that's exactly why she stands out on this list. Because despite being born into one of the richest and most influential families in the Philippines, Gina Lopez lived in a way that often felt completely disconnected from the lifestyle people normally associate with extreme wealth. The Lopez family is tied to a massive business empire connected to media, energy, infrastructure, and real estate. Their influence has shaped major industries in the country for decades. So by default, Gina Lopez had access to a level of privilege and financial security most people could only imagine. But instead of building a public identity around luxury, she became known for something very different: environmental activism, public service, and advocacy work. That contrast made her incredibly unique. While many wealthy personalities are recognized for glamorous lifestyles, Gina Lopez was often seen immersed in humanitarian projects, environmental campaigns, and community-centered initiatives. Her public image felt more connected to purpose than extravagance, more focused on helping people and protecting natural resources than showing off wealth. And because of that, many people underestimated just how powerful and wealthy the family behind her actually was. Even when she served as Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, her image remained centered around advocacy instead of status. She spoke passionately about environmental protection, mining regulation, and social responsibility in ways that made her seem more like an activist than someone connected to old money influence. But behind that grounded and mission-driven lifestyle was access to one of the country's most established fortunes. And that's what earns her a place on this countdown. Because Gina Lopez proved that extreme wealth doesn't always lead to a flashy public life. Sometimes, the richest people choose to direct their attention somewhere completely different. And in her case, it was toward causes bigger than herself. Chapter 6. Vivienne Tan. When people think about the richest families in the Philippines, the Lucio Tan empire is impossible to ignore. We're talking about a business network connected to airlines, banking, tobacco, liquor, real estate, and billion-peso corporations that have influenced the country for decades. And right within that world of enormous financial power is Vivienne Tan. But unlike many wealthy personalities who enjoy being seen, Vivienne Tan has built a reputation around something completely different: silence. That's what makes her so intriguing. Despite being connected to one of the biggest business fortunes in the nation, she maintains an image that feels remarkably low-key. You rarely see dramatic luxury headlines surrounding her. Rarely see her competing for public attention. And compared to today's ultra-visible wealthy influencers and celebrities, her lifestyle presentation feels almost intentionally understated. And honestly, that quietness makes the wealth feel even more serious. Because people with truly generational money often move differently. They don't always need validation from social media or public praise. Their influence already exists behind boardrooms, investments, corporations, and decades of established business power. Vivienne Tan fits perfectly into that category. The companies tied to the Lucio Tan empire impact millions of Filipinos every single day. From banking services to airline travel, the scale of wealth surrounding the family is massive. Yet if you saw Vivienne Tan in a public setting without context, you might never immediately assume she belongs to one of the country's wealthiest circles. That contrast is exactly why she belongs on this list. Because while modern luxury culture often rewards people for looking rich, some of the wealthiest individuals prefer a completely different approach, remaining elegant, controlled, and almost invisible to the public eye. And that's the fascinating thing about hidden wealth. Sometimes the people connected to the biggest fortunes aren't the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they're the quietest. But moving into the top 5, the level of influence becomes even bigger because the next names are tied to industries and corporations that millions of Filipinos rely on every single day without even realizing who's behind them. Chapter 5. Cynthia Villar. When people see Cynthia Villar in public, the first thing they usually notice isn't luxury, it's simplicity. Whether she's visiting farms, attending community events, or speaking in practical, straightforward ways, her image often feels more like a hardworking public servant than someone connected to one of the largest fortunes in the Philippines. But behind that grounded appearance is an enormous financial empire. Cynthia Villar is linked to the Villar family, one of the wealthiest families in the entire country. Through real estate giant Vistaland and other major business ventures, the family built a fortune tied to housing developments, shopping centers, retail spaces, memorial parks, and massive infrastructure projects spread across the Philippines. That level of wealth is hard to even imagine. We're talking about billions connected to industries that shape how millions of Filipinos live every day. Entire communities, subdivisions, malls, and commercial properties carry the Villar influence. Yet despite all of that, Cynthia Villar's public image has remained surprisingly practical and low-key compared to what people usually expect from ultra-rich personalities. And that's exactly why she stands out on this list. Because instead of presenting herself with non-stop luxury displays, she often appears focused on agriculture, livelihood projects, and grassroots community work. In interviews and public appearances, there's usually a strong emphasis on practicality and productivity rather than glamour or extravagance. That contrast can easily make people underestimate the scale of wealth connected to her life. But make no mistake, the Villar empire is massive. The family's influence stretches across real estate and business sectors in ways that quietly impact millions of people nationwide. And while many wealthy individuals try to look richer than everyone else, Cynthia Villar often projects the opposite image: disciplined, simple, and highly work-focused. And maybe that's part of the strategy. Because sometimes the people with the biggest fortunes don't need to constantly remind the world they're rich. Their businesses already speak loudly enough. And as this countdown enters the top 4, the next names become even more powerful. Women connected to corporate empires so huge that their influence reaches far beyond the Philippines itself. Chapter 4. Susan Company. At number 4, we move into a name that quietly sits behind one of the most dominant retail empires in the Philippines, yet rarely gets the kind of loud public attention people usually expect from billionaires. Susan Co. is one of the key figures behind Pure Gold Price Club, a supermarket and retail giant that has become part of everyday life for millions of Filipinos across the country. And that's where her story becomes interesting. Because Pure Gold isn't just a store, it's a nationwide system. From groceries and household essentials to large-scale retail expansion across urban and provincial areas, the brand has grown into one of the most recognizable supermarket chains in the Philippines. It serves a massive customer base daily, quietly generating billions in revenue while operating in the background of ordinary life. But despite being connected to that level of financial power, Susan Coe herself maintains a surprisingly low-profile presence. You don't often see her living a flashy, attention-driven lifestyle in public. There's no constant display of luxury or a heavily curated billionaire persona dominating social media narratives. Instead, her image is far more restrained, focused on business, operations, and long-term growth rather than public spectacle. And that contrast is what makes her fit this countdown so well. Because when people think of extreme wealth, they often imagine loud luxury, private jets, designer showcases, and constant media visibility. But Susan Coe represents a very different version of success, one where influence is measured by how deeply a business is embedded into everyday society, not how loudly the owner displays their wealth. In fact, many shoppers interact with Pure Gold regularly without ever thinking about the scale of ownership or the level of wealth behind it. That's the hidden nature of retail empires. They blend into daily life so seamlessly that the people behind them can remain almost invisible to the public eye. Yet behind that quiet presence is a financial position tied to one of the strongest retail networks in the country. And that's the real shock factor. Someone who helps control a business empire serving millions every day can still move through public life without the constant spotlight that usually comes with extreme wealth. And as we climb higher in this countdown, the next names become even more powerful because now we're entering families and individuals whose influence stretches far beyond retail into industries that shape the entire economic landscape of the Philippines. Chapter 3. Alice Eduardo. Some wealthy people inherit fortunes. Others build them from the ground up through years of pressure, risk, and relentless ambition. And Alice Eduardo belongs firmly in that second category. Today, she's recognized as one of the most successful businesswomen in the Philippines, leading a construction empire responsible for major infrastructure and high-profile development projects across the country. Through her company, she built a reputation in an industry traditionally dominated by men, earning influence, respect, and a fortune worth far more than most people realize. But despite operating in a world filled with money, power, and billion-peso contracts, Alice Eduardo's public image has remained surprisingly grounded. That's what makes her stand out. Because when many people imagine someone connected to massive construction wealth, they picture non-stop extravagance and elite luxury culture. But Alice Eduardo often carries herself with a calm and disciplined presence that feels more focused on work and leadership than on showing off wealth. And honestly, that contrast makes her success even more impressive. The projects tied to her company involve enormous financial scale, major buildings, commercial developments, and infrastructure connected to some of the country's most important institutions. That means the level of money surrounding her world is massive. Yet she rarely presents herself in a way that constantly screams ultra-rich. Instead, her image is usually associated with professionalism, resilience, and business discipline. That low-key approach is exactly why she belongs on this list. Because unlike personalities who use luxury to attract attention, Alice Eduardo represents the type of wealth built quietly through execution and long-term business growth. The focus isn't on appearing rich, it's on staying powerful. And that difference matters. In many ways, her story reflects a kind of hidden financial strength that many people underestimate at first glance. You might see elegance and professionalism, but behind it is a business empire tied to projects worth billions. And now, as we enter the final two, the scale of influence becomes even more unbelievable, because the next women are connected to some of the most powerful corporate dynasties in the entire Philippines. Chapter 2. Elizabeth Sy. At this point in the countdown, we're no longer talking about ordinary wealth. We're talking about a family empire so massive that millions of Filipinos interact with it almost every single day without even thinking about who owns it. And right near the center of that empire is Elizabeth Sy. The Sy family name is already legendary in Philippine business. Through SM Investments, the family controls one of the largest conglomerates in Southeast Asia, spanning malls, retail, banking, property development, and commercial infrastructure on an enormous scale. Their influence is so widespread that entire cities practically revolve around businesses connected to the SM brand. That level of power is almost difficult to comprehend. But what makes Elizabeth Sy fascinating is how quietly she exists within that world. Despite being connected to one of the richest families in the country, she maintains a remarkably low-profile image compared to the scale of the fortune surrounding her. You rarely see flashy headlines centered around her personal lifestyle. Rarely see excessive luxury displays or social media-driven attention campaigns. In fact, many ordinary Filipinos may recognize the SM name instantly without knowing much about the individuals behind it. And maybe that's intentional, because truly established wealth often moves differently from celebrity wealth. It doesn't always need public validation or constant visibility. The empire itself already speaks loudly enough. That's exactly the energy Elizabeth Sy gives off. Her public presence feels controlled, professional, and deeply connected to business operations rather than image building. And while many people online compete to appear wealthy, she represents the opposite. Someone connected to extraordinary financial power who doesn't constantly advertise it. But behind that understated image is access to one of the most influential corporate systems in the entire region. We're talking about shopping malls visited by millions, financial institutions managing enormous assets, and real estate developments spread across the country. The scale is staggering, and yet, despite all of that, Elizabeth Sy still carries an almost invisible public presence compared to the fortune attached to her name. Which brings us to the #1 spot, where hidden wealth reaches an entirely different level. Chapter 1. Teresita Sy-Coson. At #1, we arrive at a woman connected to one of the largest and most powerful business empires not just in the Philippines, but in all of Southeast Asia. Teresita Sy-Coson isn't simply wealthy. She operates in a financial universe so massive that it quietly shapes the daily lives of millions of people every single day. And yet, most people would never immediately describe her as flashy. That's what makes her the perfect choice for the top spot on this countdown. The Sy family empire, built through SM investments, stretches across malls, retail chains, banking, real estate, commercial infrastructure, and massive corporate holdings that dominate major sectors of the Philippine economy. From shopping centers and supermarkets to financial institutions and property developments, the scale of influence connected to the family is almost impossible to ignore. But despite being tied to that level of enormous wealth, Teresita Sy-Coson maintains an image that feels remarkably disciplined and understated. You don't often see dramatic displays of luxury surrounding her public identity. No constant social media flexing, no celebrity-style obsession with attention. Instead, she's known more for business leadership, corporate decision-making, and quiet influence behind the scenes, and honestly, that low-profile approach makes the wealth feel even bigger. Because people with truly generational money often don't behave like celebrities. They don't always need public approval or visible extravagance to prove status. Their influence already exists in boardrooms, investments, and billion-dollar industries operating silently in the background. That's exactly the world Teresita Sy-Coson represents. While millions of Filipinos walk through SM malls every week, use banks connected to the family empire, or interact with businesses under the SM umbrella, very few stop to think about the woman helping oversee one of the largest corporate systems in the region. And that contrast is what makes this story so fascinating. Someone can possess unimaginable wealth, enormous influence, and access to billion-dollar power, yet still present themselves with a level of simplicity and restraint that almost hides just how rich they truly are. And in many ways, that may be the ultimate sign of old money power, when you're wealthy enough that you no longer feel the need to look wealthy at all. And honestly, that's what makes these women so fascinating. In a world obsessed with showing off wealth, these Filipinas prove that the richest people aren't always the loudest. Some of them move quietly, live simply, and still control fortunes powerful enough to shape entire industries. So, which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to her status, and turn on notifications for more unbelievable stories.